Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Rachel Haugroth, the Director of Flute Sales for Schmidt Music, and today I want to talk to you about body mapping. This is going to be geared more toward instructors, although this information is definitely helpful for students as well. But I want to talk about some of the basics that we need to keep in mind as we're teaching flute virtually, which is a new reality for many of us, and also just some general tips to keep in mind when we do eventually return to in-person, face-to-face instruction. So first thing I want to talk about is how you balance the flute. So this is something that is often overlooked when we're talking about beginning instruments, but I think it's one of the most important parts of what we do. So when we're playing flute, there are 3 different points that are always in contact with the player. We've got contact here with the embouchure plate. We have that squishy part of the left hand index finger that's resting underneath the flute. And then we have the right hand thumb that's going to provide balance and support. So together, we can actually hold up the entire instrument just on those 3 points. And that's something that's really important for beginners to be able to do, just so that they feel confident in what they're going to be doing with the flute, and so that it doesn't feel like it's going to roll around. So one important thing when we're doing that is to make sure that our rods here, so where all of the keys are connected, are pointed up toward the ceiling and less at the wall behind us. So if things are too far back, the balance is going to shift really far and put stress on our wrist, which is not great. Whereas if we push a little bit further forward with that right hand thumb into that left hand point, the rods are pointed up toward the ceiling, and those are going to be more stable, and then you can hover over the tops of the keys. So that's one really quick thing to make sure beginners understand. We are not holding with the right hand pinky on that D sharp key. That finger should be just as flexible and move just as easily as all of the others if we're balancing properly. Something else to point out is body mapping in general is this very broad topic, but in general, it just means that we have a map in our brains of how our body is functioning while we're playing flute. For many of us, this is mismapped, so we have a perception of certain aspects of our body doing different things than what it actually does. So making sure that we're understanding what actually happens is very critical in our process of playing. One excellent resource for that is Lee Pearson's Body Mapping for Flutists. It's an excellent book and a really quick read, but it really points out some wonderful concepts about flute playing. One of the most common that I discuss with my students has to do with the right hand wrist. So oftentimes, because we haven't talked enough about balance, students will come with flutes that point down and back, right? So we can see those rods are pointed back at this wall and not at the ceiling, and that's putting strain on this right wrist here. So in general, what we're looking for is we want one long line from the wrist all the way back to the elbow here, so that your tendons are operating more efficiently and with fewer breaks in that action. Now, what happens with us sometimes is we think of the wrist as being connected to the elbow. So sometimes with beginners, you'll ask them to lift their wrist, and we end up with this action instead, right? So this is actually lifting the elbow and the wrist, but they can operate independently. So this is the wrist, this is your elbow, and together they do this kind of thing. So understanding that there are different parts, and really we just want to lift that wrist. You can think of petting a kitten or a puppy, just really delicate, and it almost forms like this C shape. If you happen to have an older student, I talk to them about holding a coffee cup or a latte cup, and oftentimes that shape will translate very well onto the instrument itself. One other really important aspect of playing is the actual angle at which we hold our instrument. I think this is actually probably second to balancing the instrument, making sure we have this correct angle here. So when we're playing, too often we think of flute as being a 2-dimensional instrument, right? We think of the instrument being parallel to our shoulders, or like this. So that's not a very comfortable position to be in. And we can actually feel, if you take your right hand and put it right over your heart almost, if you rotate your left arm in front of you, you can actually feel that joint moving underneath your hand. So that's your shoulder. And we want to make sure that that rests in a free and easy position. So if I rotate, I find that about here is where I need to be. And then of course you can move your elbow to do the rest here. So it's not all in the shoulder. We're moving the elbow in a little bit. And that tends to be where I'm comfortable in that open angle for me. And the fun thing is, as you do this, you can actually hear your voice change sometimes. So if I'm too close to my body, I feel very tight and like restricted in this motion. Whereas if I come further and further away from my body, the resonance of my voice actually changes. And this is amplified when you're playing the instrument itself. So one way to think of that is if a student is playing their flute properly and in that really great alignment, we're not actually going to be able to face straight on at the music stand. Instead, we actually have to rotate a little bit. So if I'm playing with that open position, I'm actually turned away. In order to come back to that position, our hips actually have to change direction slightly. And then I'm able to look straight ahead and at the stand. So this comes into play especially when students are seated and playing their instruments, which is usually what happens for the first several years until they get into private instruction of some sort. So making sure that they understand that alignment, that our hips are facing one direction and then the torso is twisting to come back so that our shoulder is free and easy to move. So these are just a few little tips about body alignment, but they will go a long way in starting a beginner on the right track. Again, check out Lee Pearson's Body Mapping for Flutists. We've got that available on our website, but feel free to also reach out to me if you have any questions about any of this information or just want some tips on what to do with beginning flutists. Thank you so much for watching. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram and subscribe on YouTube as well. We will see you next time.